Okay, I believe we're live now. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Francesca Dubrock and I serve as the Chief Curator here at the Anchorage Museum, and I'm going to start us off with a land acknowledgement. The Anchorage Museum is situated on Dena'ina homeland, and we would like to offer our gratitude for centuries of Dena'ina care and for their ongoing leadership and stewardship of these beautiful lands and waters. With that, welcome everyone. Last Friday, we opened the exhibition, How to Survive. This exhibition considers the idea of survival through hope and care and asks how gestures and practices of love, protection, nurturing, and sharing can help us face the climate crisis. It includes artwork by 16 artists from across the globe, as well as an installation of cultural belongings from our collection, a community climate archive, a materials library. It was conceived both as an exhibition to think about climate challenges in a more hopeful and aspirational way, but also as an opportunity to experiment on the museum practice side of things with how we make exhibitions and try to find more sustainable working practices, materials, and approaches. So today we're lucky to have two extraordinary artists with us, both of whom really helped push our thinking institutionally and really helped frame a lot of our thoughts around the concept and themes of the exhibition. They are Erin Ggaadimits Ivalu Gingrich and Carolina Caycedo. Both artists consider care for the land and for communities in myriad ways through their artworks and practices. So I'm going to introduce both Carolina and Erin, and then we'll turn it over to them to do their presentations. And then at the end of the program, we'll have time, well, I would say it's about 2/3 of the way through the program, we'll have time for audience questions and more of an informal discussion. So Carolina Caycedo is a London-born Colombian multidisciplinary artist living in Los Angeles. Her geographic photographs, artist books, hanging sculptures, performances, films, and installations are gateways into larger discussions about how we treat each other and the world around us. Process and participation are central to Caycedo's practice. She contributes to the reconstruction of environmental and historical memory as a fundamental space for climate and social justice. Informed by Indigenous and feminist epistemologies, she confronts the role of the colonial gaze in the privatization and dispossession of land and water. Erin Ggaadimits Ivalu Gingrich is a Koyukon, Athabascan, and Inupiaq carver, an interdisciplinary artist living, working, and subsisting in South Central Alaska. Honoring her Arctic and subarctic ancestral homelands, Ivalu's work represents what ties her and her ancestors to the North. Through carved, painted, and beaded sculptures and mask forms, Ivalu creates representations of the honored wild relatives that have provided for her, her family, and her ancestors since time immemorial. So thanks to both the artists for being here. Neither of them are in Alaska right now, so we're kind of doing a global time zone span right now for this talk. They're each going to share about their work, and then we'll have time for questions. So I really encourage everybody to type any questions you have for the artists in the Facebook live chat, and we'll be monitoring that, and we'll be sharing your questions with the artists. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin to begin her presentation.
Payanakpak Fran, Pagalisti Uzlatak Uvanga Erin Ggaadimits Ivalu Gingrich. I am calling in right now from the unseceded and traditional territories of the Mi'kmaq people here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm very grateful to be a guest on these lands, which are incredibly beautiful and warm right now. So I'm grateful for that. I'm going to talk about the work I made very specifically for this exhibition. And those pieces are a Cookman and a Punman, or from river and from snow. So again, this is who I am. I am Erin Ggaadimits Ivalu Gingrich. I'm Koyukon Dene, an Inupiaq carver and interdisciplinary artist. My family has ancestral ties to many places in the north, but My practice comes from an education that I got at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where I learned how to carve from my mentors, Dacre King Maynor, Kathleen Carlo Kendall, and Glenn Simpson. I'm currently pursuing more education. I'm currently an MFA student with the Institute of American Indian Arts in their low residency studio arts program. And I'm here in Halifax working on a project with the Inuit Arts Foundation in conjunction with the Nocturne Festival. So I'm a carver, and specifically I like to specify that because I feel like everything else I do kind of revolves or orbits my carving work and adorns it, insulates it, and cares for it in a way that allows me to continue that work. So I utilize photographs, writing, and other forms to repeat, insulate, and continue my carving practice. So my Nunat or homelands very specifically are the lands of the Inupiaq and Koyukantine peoples. The communities that I have ancestral ties to are Sitnasak or Nome, Nulato, and Ukiyavik. And so I like to really situate myself and my practice in those places because I can cite them as the places that have created me in my work in a very tangible way. And so this is kind of what it's about. And where it started for me is, it's time spent picking berries with my family, time spent harvesting and getting to witness the beautiful gifts from my homelands, like this beautiful daniga that gave itself to my family. And so that's where this work is really from in so many ways. And so my savak or work is as a carver, I make mask forms and sculpture. I started working independently on that practice after I graduated in 2014. And I really started focusing on representing the things that have kept me and my ancestors here in the North, our wild resources, our wild relatives that gift us with their presence, as well as nutrition and care in so many different ways. This is a Nakchak mask, one of my very first carvings. And these are some blueberries that I got to make last year. And so this work is really, it's been wonderful to work as a carver and expand and explore that practice. It's a subtractive practice that really challenges the way I think about work, because you start with material and reduce it till you can have what remains, and that ends up being a face or a body form carved from wood. And so when I was approached last year by Fran in the Anchorage Museum with this concept for this exhibition, I asked myself, how am I going to go about this? And of course, it's going to be with wood and wood chips and carving. But very specifically, this question of how we survive, how we stay here, how we continue to be in connection to homelands is something I've been thinking about a lot, and something I've been thinking about even more as I've started to travel a little bit and experience other people's homelands. And so I really have started to ground my practice using Inupiaq words and language to fundamentally frame the work I'm doing in the framework that has been designed by my ancestors. And so this word that I feel very connected with and very grateful to have found is kanawapikit. And it means to be responsible, to be careful, to be considerate, to take good care of one's things, and to be aware of what's going on. That's such a beautiful concept and really plays into this awareness of care and how active of a process it is, and that care is not passive, it's a very active thing. And so these are the first sketches that I developed for this work, because the things that I care about most in our homelands right now that have mattered a lot to me is the presence of snow and the presence of our salmon in our waters. And so here we have my sketches of a kargek or ptarmigan. Here the Ikalupik are swimming in the river. Another concept that I've really tried to understand and bring forth is Kinguvat. And so Kinguvat is our inheritance. And the other meaning of it very specifically is knowledge passed down from the ancestors. And I really love that that is understood in Brak, that our inheritance is what is given to us by our elders and by those who came before us. And so here are the templates for my carvings, because this is how I start my process. I start sketching, and then I make templates for my carving blanks, because it's important to me that the work can be repeated if necessary, but also it's just part of the process, because I adorn my carving space with the templates and try to surround myself with images of what I'm hoping to create. Another concept that really added to this project for me was this idea of inulik, or an inhabited place. My Nunat, my homelands, is not a wilderness. It's not an untouched wilderness, which is often something that gets said about Alaska. It is a lived place in so many ways. It's been lived with gently and with care. And so I was really thinking about that idea of living with care and being aware that all native lands have been lived with and cared for, and yet they remain in so many ways unaltered and unedited in such a beautiful act of care that we let them be what they are. And so these are the installation pieces for the Akargak, the Apunan piece. I went and harvested willows in the springtime and dried them in my home so that they could be an authentic representation and direct material for the places that ptarmigan do call home, which is in the willows. And here I was adding the fins to my first ikalupik or salmon as I was finishing carving them in the process. I use beads in my work because it's foundationally important to me to include that practice. It's one of the first art forms I've been taught by my grandmother, Gertrude Kelleher. And it really seemed to be a beautiful material to translate these things I'm trying to represent. Very specifically, the rippled strands really translate to the water and liquid of the river home that salmon live in, as well as the draped snow that adorns the willows in the wintertime at home. And so I feel very lucky to be able to have references and direct sources that come from my homelands. And so here we have some references gifted to me by my elders and from Sitnasak. They still harvest ptarmigan. We still harvest ptarmigan and enjoy it. And so they provided for me these references because they know it's important to my work. The ikalukpik or salmon pieces also have direct reference to a very specific place, and that being the Caycedo River and the fisheries there. When I was there this past summer with my family, I took the time to photograph the salmon that we were taking care of, that were being put away for the winter, and use those as a direct reference. So this work comes very specifically from the Caycedo River and the country outside of Nome, because that's where these resources come from and call home. And so that's where this work is from and can call home. So snow and rivers and water are so vital to our homes in so many different ways here. And it's not something that, I mean, it's always there. And yet what I feel like we still take it for granted, because I'm starting to realize that the life that I get to have in my homelands is not the same sort of relationship that others get to have to their homelands. And that's such a different thing to understand and experience as I've been traveling. The presence of snow is such an incredible gift that is being changed right now because of the stabilization of our environment and our weather through climate change. The presence of our salmon is also changing. I know my family on the Yukon River are fighting very hard right now in order to stay in relation to their salmon. And it's a very difficult thing to be experiencing and witnessing right now, because our ancestral ties to these things go back before it can be counted, to time immemorial. And there's the intent that we should and hope to be in connection with them perpetually, forward and beyond. But they're so vital to what is home for me, our salmon and in our snow. They really do make place to me. And so the finished work that I got to create for this exhibition is apunmin and cookmin. This is apunmin, which is from snow. It is the ptarmigan that live in the snow-covered willows. The ptarmigan have this beautiful transformation that they experience and show and display every single year as the seasons change. They change seasonally as well, shifting from a mottled brown to white. And so they need the snow to be the winter beings that they are. If they were to start changing and not have snow, it would really change the ecosystem and their placement in it and their vulnerability in it as well. I myself really need snow. Snow is so important to the joy I get to experience being home. I don't think I could live somewhere without snow. And as it's been changing and not being what it had been in the past, it's something that I'm struggling with and trying to adapt to and understand, and be grateful for the snow that we get to have on back home. This is the other piece that I finished for the exhibition. This is Cookman from River. As I said, the salmon are home to me as well, in so many ways. And last year, I got to witness a pool of salmon as they were making their way up a waterway back to their home and to live their purpose. And it was so incredibly beautiful to watch them and be present with them for a time. It was so incredibly beautiful to see their gentleness and care while swimming through those waters as they were coming home. And so I thought about those fish. I thought about being able to witness them. I thought about the wealth of being able to be present with them and see them. And I thought about what it would be like to see them not from above, but from below, and to be able to see them from the water or see them from the view of the land that holds them and cares for them. It really was a beautiful experience that informed this work directly. And yeah, this is one of the largest installations I've created so far, and I'm very grateful for how it's turned out and for its dimensions and presence, utilizing these installation pieces on the sides to represent those waters, and the color of the gallery walls to echo the glacial runoff that feeds so many of our beautiful rivers and creeks back home. Along with those tangible pieces, I I did some experimenting and produced some writing and wrote a poem called Pin Bones. That work was recorded. I did a spoken word poem and we recorded it, and it lives in place with those installations in the exhibition. It was a point of vulnerability for me to write and to present that work. I'm coming into relation to this practice and trying to understand it more, but it is a way for me to adorn these pieces and try to represent the care that I feel for my salmon and for the waters that care for them. So Kayana Anabasi, thank you so much. That is it for me for now.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was really lovely. I appreciate how you framed the whole presentation with the use of the Inupiaq words. So thank you for that. All right, we're going to turn it over to Carolina now.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. So I'll focus also. Well, thank you, Erin, for the presentation. I really enjoyed it too, and Fran for the invitation to be in conversation with Erin and yourself, and to the invitation to work with you for this exhibition. I've never been in Alaska or in your homelands, Erin. I'm connecting from Spain, from Madrid. Here you can see an image of the work installed at the museum. It's an installation with several components. Right, you see a video portrait that makes part of a wider series called Plant Portraits. We also have two murals like in the background flanking the space. One was an existing plant portrait and the other one a new one done for the exhibition. And there's a piece on the table you see there. It's a publication from 2017 called The Serpent River Book, and then in the central part a new Cosmatarraya, which is also an ongoing series, which is done with fishing nets of different kind of collected in different ways. In this case, the whole process of building this Cosmatarraya was done in collaboration with the staff at the museum. So the Cosmatarraya, or Big Dipper, Big Dipper. You have to help me with the title.
I'm going to pull it up because I want to get it right too.
Yeah. There was a really exciting process. So the Cosmatarrayas are built with fishing nets, understanding that fishing nets, and this comes out of having the opportunity of learning and sharing time and space with fisherfolk communities, riverine fisherfolk communities in different rivers of the Americas, in Colombia, where I'm from, in Brazil, in Guatemala, in Mexico. But understanding that the fishing net in a way is a cosmos of its own that carries the knowledge of weaving, that carries also ancestral knowledge. I really like that concept you shared, Erin, of knowledge that's transmitted through generation, and that's our inheritance, right? And the Cosmatarraya is a representation of that. No, like you learn how to weave, but also the Cosmatarraya is what connects us to the river and to the fish relatives, right? And to the flows and the currents of the river, to where the fish like to hang out and to sleep, and to old time and temporalities when they come up the river and whatnot. So I've been using a lot of different fishing nets, mostly cast nets, which are circular nets that are kind of human size, a little bit maybe larger, to fish in rivers. But in this case, what I learned is that the dip net is one of the most common nets used in Alaskan territories to actually capture, or let's say harvest salmon. And so we collected a number of those, and some of them used, maybe some of them, actually I think some of them used through through used markets, and also collected some leftover netting, leftover buoys. There's also a fishing rod in there. And then there was a whole process of classifying those objects that we collected, and then coming up with a design, and then the staff at the museum kind of interpreting in a way those designs, and then a process of back and forth through virtual connection, like face calls and stuff like that, to build this installation that you have in the museum right now. The name is the Big Dipper, and
it's Celestial Autonomy, the dance of the Big Dipper and North Star.
thank you. It's almost 11 p.m. here. Please, apologies. But it came out of learning also that astronomy has also been an inheritance and a knowledge passed through generation in Alaskan territories. A way to ground yourself and to move yourself around the territories. I guess in a way I can only imagine a way to connect also to the sky above. And it's really beautiful how this also represents, maybe in a more mainstream way, in the actual design of the flag. But this idea of a celestial autonomy, and you know, the little I could research on how also Western forms of astronomy have been taken over this more ancestral ways of connecting to this knowledge and to this inheritance. So I wanted to make reference to that in the title. The buoys are also marked with these circles, trying to represent also fish eyes. I really like what you said, Erin, about looking from the bottom of the river up, no? And to represent this nature and this territories and these relatives that are always looking back at us, no? And that, you know, this acknowledgement of them looking at us is what makes us, you know. If there's nothing that looks at us, nothing that touches our body, nothing that sustains us, we can never be. We need that other gaze, the gaze of our animal plant relatives, to become, you know. Without them we cannot become. We're not even in existence. But I just wanted to share a little bit of older cosmatarrayas, just to give you ideas of how different this whole process and, you know, the using of the dip net has been for me. I think I'd used a couple of dip nets before, much smaller actually in size. But these are how these different cast nets and cosmatarraya series become. I had referenced the salmon before, and I've had a chance also to share and learn some space and time with communities affected by the loss of salmon communities in their everyday and in their own community and rivers, and felt how hard that is, you know, to face that loss. And then other cosmatarrayas become portraits too. So portraiture, these are examples of other cosmatarrayas in different spaces. But maybe I would like to focus on portraiture. This is a portrait of a cobra grande, which is a deity, a spirit, and like the river body in Amazon epistemologies, some of the Amazon cosmovisions, where the river is actually a moving snake that traverses the territory and that creates channels in the river. But this idea of portraiture is really important for me, and that's how I call these drawings plant portraits. Like if we think about the more traditional colonial way of representing nature, it's always through a landscape. You know, that becomes a window through which we observe landscape, but it also separates us from what we call that landscape, which is also a word that I have a lot of conflict with. But instead, portraiture has become a much more abundant way for me to, actually learn about some of these plant relatives and animal relatives and river beings and mountain beings. Because I understand, and I've learned actually through sharing with a lot of communities that are in their homelands, that these are relatives, these are beings, that these are that we're connected to them, and that we have to take care of them and confront them sometimes, right? So the idea of portraying a plant, portraying an animal, portraying a place, a location, a territory makes much more sense. Also because I've understood that as artists, we have been complicit with that colonial gaze, and that the colonial gaze has been an instrument for land grab, dispossession, displacement, no? So trying to understand the responsibilities we carry also through the production of images, and unlearning this givens that we, and this kind of training that we receive in the academy. And just finding your own ways to, through the process of image making, to relate to certain animals, plants. Just want to talk about this one in Jarrow We Trust. This is actually the rendering we have at the museum right now. It was produced by a local artist called Rejoy Armamento. Thank you, Rejoy, if you're connected, I'm not sure. But basically, what we do with the plant portraits is that we use botanical images or Western renders. That's kind of the use of these images is to clarify and literally dissect the plant so that we understand it completely. But I believe that these renderings are always miss a lot of things of what these plants are, what they do, what they can offer us, how they sustain us, how we relate to them. And so the kind of the methodology of the plant portrait is to grab and these Western kind of botanical drawings and just make something else with them. In this case, in Jarrow We Trust, of course, takes the motto of in God We Trust from the dollar bill, and kind of shift it at a moment where in the United States our rights for feminine and female healthcare are being eroded, and so the yarrow is an abortifacient plant, and in that sense, to give our trust to this plant as perhaps an option when our legislators and our kind of legislation is not provided for us. And Sphagnum, this is a new piece for the exhibition. It's a combination of portraits of different kinds of sphagnum or peat moss. I first came in contact with peat moss in the other extreme of the Americas, all the way down in Tierra del Fuego in Chile, and understood the importance of these plants as water storage, as carbon storage, as nurturing for different species in the territories. And I wanted to make a connection also, understanding, having this continental view, of course, from the south to the north, kind of a salute, if you wish, of plants, a connection now. Maybe I just wrap it up there. These are just like other images of different renderings of plant portraits. In Jarrow We Trust, in another rendering that's up right now in Massachusetts, and on the other side, our beloved rue, that is also very useful in all sorts of feminine needs and feminine care, and that I've personally used a lot, after postpartum and every month, basically. So maybe I can wrap it up here and we can open it up to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. That was really lovely. So I have a lot of questions here, but I also want to remind folks who are tuning in to type questions in the chat if you have any for Carolina and Erin. I wanted to start maybe with water, since that comes through very strongly in all of the work that you both created for this exhibition. Water has a great, and I think sometimes even suggested or subtle presence, Erin, through the use of snow, evoking snow with the beads and the ptarmigan installation. Sometimes suggested presence in your works. Can you talk a little bit about working with and also on behalf of water, and maybe share a little bit with our listeners about what you have learned from engaging with marine and river environments?
I'll jump in on that one. Yeah, water is so incredibly vital to the ecosystem in my homelands in so many different ways. It's so funny when we think of the word drought, we think of a dryness, right? We don't think of the lack of snowfall as a drought, but where I'm from, it kind of is. The snow runoff feeds the rivers and water systems that the salmon call home. The snow feed the tundra and feed our berries. And so a couple years ago, very specifically, we had a lack of snow cover. And what happened as a result of that, ecological event was that there were no berries that year. And that's another very important, vital part of our ecosystem and a part of the subsistence economy in Alaska is our berries. And so there's this system that exists. And so, yeah, Alaska has experienced an amount of drought, and that being the lack of snow. And unfortunately, that's probably going to continue in the future to get worse. But recognizing the incredible value of the water that comes to us frozen, recognizing the value of the water that provides a home for our fish, and understanding where those homes are. Home isn't just one place, it is many. And for the salmon, their freshwater is their home, but it's also out in the ocean. And right now we know that while they're home in the ocean, they're being vulnerable to fishing techniques that don't recognize the value of them and don't recognize their fragility in the ecosystems that they come home to in Alaska. So creating work that represents these things is important to me because they are all a part of the system that make up home. And right now they're changing. It's not as stable as it used to be. It's being uncertain in so many ways. And that instability is something we have to learn and be aware of and take care for.
Thanks, Erin. Carolina, do you have anything you want to add to that? I know that you have years of working in a really kind of socially engaged mode around rivers and water and communities that depend on them. So without you having to explain for hours other elements of your practice.
Yeah, of course. I don't know. I always resist kind of the idea to be like encapsulated in the artist that talks about water or that my work is around water. I would say my work is not about water. It's about a set of relationships, right? Like it's impossible to think about water without all the nurturing it provides to a territory, to a forest, to fish, right? So I like to think about it kind of in a more intersectional way, if you want to call it that way, but to really understand it as one of those parts that, the set of relationships that we call ecosystems is. And so, yeah, to fight for water is to fight for life, is to fight for food, is to fight for our land. our lands, is to fight for that inheritance, that ancestral knowledge that is connected. One of the kind of craziest things, or like most powerful things, I would say, that I've heard and I've learned is that, you know, all bodies of water are connected. And it was told to me by a spiritual leader from the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, Mamo Pedro Juan. And you kind of know it, but until you hear it in that way. And then also, like, when a river is dammed, diverted, polluted, that river gets disconnected from all its brothers and sisters, now from all those, but also the communities who were connected to other communities through that body of water get disconnected too, you know. So I think a lot of my work is trying to rebuild those bridges, to rebuild those connections, or at least to remember them, no?
That's really lovely. I enjoyed also what you said about the nets being, you know, this physical thing that connects us really viscerally to different concepts of time and movement and other creatures. And, you know, I think when it's such a kind of quotidian equipment within a culture, we can kind of lose perspective a little bit on how special those tools are and how much knowledge is contained within them.
They are, and how they, like, every time you cast a net or you dip a net, you know, that reinforces this practice that the river, the sea is a common good. It's not a resource, it's a common good. It's like, you know, this is a political act that reinforces that commons that we inherited and that we're supposed to take care of. So they're very powerful symbols and reminders.
I think too, there's something that we take for granted about just spending time, you know, if you're fishing, you're spending time with the river and with the water. And Erin, like you were reflecting, just having this moment where you were deeply observing these fish, these salmon going back to spawn. I think there's so much learning that happens and when waiting to cast the net too. It's important. Okay, so I know you both spoke a lot about this, but I just wanted to kind of circle back on it a little bit, and I'm trying to figure out what exactly the question is I want to ask here, but it goes back to this idea of portraiture and the way you are both portraying these non-human entities, plants, animals, or even suggesting kind of larger ecosystems. You both talked about this idea of seeing and being seen by other entities and looking. And Carolina, you spoke about a little bit the way that if you've been educated within like a Western art education, that there's actually quite a bit of dismantling that needs to be done to sort of re-envision what those relationships might look like. So I'm just wondering if you could each maybe talk a little bit more about how you've cultivated this way of looking, how you hope people relate to these images and installations, and you know, Carolina, perhaps like if there were any aha moments in your own practice where you sort of started to reconfigure this way of looking at land or looking with land.
Yes, there is a very specific moment, and I think it was around 2013 that I started visiting the territory of Huila in Colombia that was being impacted by the construction of a hydroelectric dam on the Yuma River or Magdalena River. And I was gathering footage and filming testimonies and images of the river, of folks who had been impacted and kind of had stakes in this conflict. one of the women I had a chance to share time with, and who's still a friend and a teacher in so many ways, Soila Ninko, she's an artisanal fisherwoman, told me that when she would go out and protest, and there was heavy protest at the moment, they would be blocking the construction of the dam. So there was a big front line there, right, at that moment. That when she would go out into protest, she would carry the Colombian flag upside down. And for any of us who had been in protest, we probably have seen this gesture of, or this aesthetic gesture, if you wish, or performatic almost, of carrying the flag upside down, which means that you're not in accordance with how the government is administering these common goods, right? And this is how she expressed it. She said, no, I'm not, I think the government, instead of being administering these common goods, are selling them out to these transnational companies and privatizing our rivers and our waters. And so when I was in the editing table, I said, oh, I'm going to do the same, because I'm also want to protest through this image I'm constructed. And so I got the image of the river and flipped it upside down in the editing table, and that was the aha moment, because I've never seen a river like this, and I realized how framed I was, with this idea that a river or water has to flow from one side to the screen to the other. If you have a waterfall, it should go from the top part of the screen to the lower part, and it's kind of this writing almost. And I also realized that a river that flows upwards can never be dammed, and can never be privatized, and can never be understood. And that's when I started appreciating those underwater takes that I was doing. And I was like, this is so murky, you can't see anything, I'm not going to use this footage. And then understanding, no, this is how it looks, this is what we need to see, and this is what we have to learn to see through, or maybe not never see. There's things that we should never see or look at either, no? So this was the moment, and that opened a possibility of cinematic language to me, and just other kind of languages too, and made me understand how constricted my gaze was, and how colonial it was, and how complicit I had been, and all the work I needed to do. So definitely that was the aha moment.
That's awesome. I love that it was such a clear gesture. Erin, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't call my pieces portraits in any way. I don't think I've ever called them portraits. I call them representations, because I feel like they are they're an attempt. I don't feel like there's ever going to be a point where it is exactly the thing. But I consider them representations, and I consider them to be a part of a long line of representation of the things that feed us. So my ancestors represented our beautiful subsistence resources since time immemorial. There are representations of it in the Anchorage Museum that go so far back. And yeah, I consider them representations, trying to bring forth images of these resources, these things, these wild relatives, these gifts, because they very much are gifts that we get to continue to live with. And so for me, it was really expanding my work to try to represent their home. And so, the snow and the river and those installation elements were a step for me to not just represent the gift itself, but the gift of the place that makes them and makes us, because we are made from these beautiful gifts that surround us back home. And wild resources need wild place in a very real way. They can't be what they are if they didn't have wild homelands that we share. And so we belong to these environments together. We do not own our land, we belong to it. And so do the wild relatives. They belong to our homelands as well. It's something we have in community with each other.
I wanted to just note before we move on to the next question, Carolina, you mentioned like just this kind of turbid water that you were filming and how, maybe there's some things we're not meant to see or that we don't get to see. And Erin, I know you and I talked about that a little bit when you were installing the work, because this was your first time portraying salmon from this like belly view. And we talked about how there was something so intimate about that view, but also that had this sort of like layer of like privacy about it, or like a little bit of distance where, because of a human perspective, you're used to seeing the fish from the other side and you couldn't access that side from the installation. There was an element of sort of keeping the viewer a little bit at an arm's length that I thought was really interesting about that installation. Did you have anything you wanted to say about that, or are the ideas too fresh still?
Yeah, I've been working with the wall in my work, my practice as a mask maker and carver. I make things that address this plane, right? And having these layers of opacity and what I like to call insulation around specific viewpoints and specific things really does come into this concept of the guarded and of the protected. It's going to be different if and when I address and create something in the round that can be surrounded. But I think that there is an amount of protection that's added to the work when you can't see all of it. We always get, as you said, this view from the top. We get to look down on salmon, but adjusting that view and changing it is something that I was very excited to try and play with. And there's also like a very private joke about making people look at salmon bellies and the beauty of them, as well as that being like a precious part of the fish that not everyone appreciates. Some people don't eat salmon bellies, which is like the wildest thing in my mind, because it is the most delicious part of the fish, or at least one of them. But yeah, we do only get one view at a time, and that's okay. Maybe that's how it should be.
That's wonderful. Okay, we have a question here from Matt, who helped construct Carolina's Cosmotaraya and built the Serpent River table. So his question kind of ties into this question about sustainability that I had for both of you. So Carolina, you spoke about how your sculpture was created long distance with Anchorage Museum staff, and we were like building things on site and sending you emails and texts, and it was this kind of new process, both for the museum and I think for your studio as well. So that was kind of a new thing. We tried to reduce our carbon footprint for generating work for this exhibition. And Erin, I mean, thinking about sustainability in this like really holistic way as well. I know that you've spoken before about practices or approaches you take with your own work, being a petite person who works in wood carving and needing to kind of conserve your physical wellness and energy. So I'd love for each of you to just touch a little bit on what this word sustainability means to you in your practice, where you're at, where you'd like to be in the future. This can be very practical, but it could also be kind of more intangible or in a more emotional realm. Matt's question was curious any aspect of working on the Cosmoteria with Anchorage Museum would inform future projects for you at all, Carolina.
I had a lot of fun working with you guys, and just there was so much to learn from this process. Also because of like this breaking of the hierarchies of who is the artist, who gets to make it, what's this touch of the artist. And I always enjoy that process. And this is not the first work where I'm pushing those hierarchies, or this like who gets to own, like for who is this done and where is it going to stay, and who takes the decision or the decisions. And collaboration for me has always been one of the places where I felt more secure and safe as an artist. Yeah, to shed off that responsibility of you carrying the decision of everything, and actually to share this with other folks, for me is very satisfying. So in that sense, is not the first time kind of deep collaborations have happened, but this format of actually not even touching the sculpture in this case and working long distance, and in that sense, avoiding my travel from LA to Alaska or any kind of shipping. I think it's definitely a place that I could I would work again that way if there was a responding team on the other side to do that. Also because, like, if I'd been to Alaska maybe as a site visit to work, probably a week, my knowledge, as much research that I could do, would never be equitable to the knowledge you have about, I don't know, the dip nets or other things, or those nuances that, as a person who is a guest or a local or actually from those homelands, can imprint the work with, right? So for me, that's also very important, I would say. And so I would definitely work again this way. And I have done work before where aspects of the piece are done locally and I send some part of the studio and then it's assembled. But this is the first time that the complete thing has been like assembled and created on site. I thought it looks great, at least from what I can see from the pictures. But it does. I appreciate what you said at the beginning, and that it really held space in a nice way. So I appreciate that. And the word sustainability for me is a word that I try to avoid personally. I think it has been co-opted by green capitalism. Sustainability means to keep the production at a certain rate, and we cannot keep the production at this rate. We needed to grow. We need to decrease our production and our consumptions. We need to take those decisions and let go of certain, I don't know, needs, invented needs, created needs. And I like the word sustenance more to talk about my work, and more than trying to think, how can I make my work sustainable, is how can my work be a sustaining practice that nurtures people actually in the front lines, that nurtures the rhetoric and the discourse we're building, that nurtures myself, that nurtures processes of land liberation, of rematriation, of land, like water and defense and protection. So how can my work nurture and sustain those practices, is the question like I ask myself.
Thank you for sharing that, Carolina. I have similar suspicions about the word sustainability. So you put a pin in it that I probably couldn't have articulated myself. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Erin.
Yeah, I have to completely agree. I was thinking about the word sustainable as well and trying to address it and recognize its relationship to industry. It is crafted specifically for industry, right? Like it doesn't exist without industry. So I was trying to think about that, and there's a Sami scholar who was did a post on Instagram, Lisa Ravna Binbog, who talks about addressing some of that concept of sustainability being in relation, not in relation to Indigenous peoples, but being, a faux connection. And so I was thinking about, what I want my practice to be and what I need it to have, and that's reciprocity. I need there to be reciprocity, because, and that's not just with the rest of the world, that's even, as I mentioned, just with myself and my own body. As a carver, I'm putting my body to work to create these pieces. And so there needs to be reciprocity for my body when I do that work. Part of that has been to get Inupiaq tattoos on my most vital carving tools, which are my hands. Another part of that has been learning how to care and slow down and witness what I'm feeling while I'm producing work. But it's this reciprocity that I really hope I can continue to foster and practice. So when I cite my work and include titles that have the place names of homelands in Indigenous language, I hope that's an act of reciprocity through that citation of the places that these wild relatives call home, so that we can be aware of what they are, what their original names are, and that they need to be protected. They need to be left to be what they are, and not be edited to be our idea of what they should be, because I think that's a lot of what happens. There was a fisheries biologist who spoke at a conference in Anchorage last spring, and I can't remember his name, but he said something about how a healthy ecosystem is not going to produce the certainty we want from them. And I really love that idea, because it recognizes the natural variabilities that exist, that wouldn't be sustainable, right? That there's natural variabilities, and they wouldn't be something that contributes to these industries that extract from them. And that seasonality exists beyond just what we experience outside, but maybe ecosystems have seasonality that's far greater and larger and more temporal than we understand right now.
That's really wonderful. Thank you, Erin. I feel like I could keep peppering you both with questions for hours. But I just wanted to share from the museum side that the tagline of this title of this exhibition, How to Survive, was definitely something that we thought a lot about on the staff side of things too, as we tried to kind of reduce the overall carbon footprint of the exhibition. We found that usually that had this equal and sort of inverse toll on staff time. And so figuring out, like this idea of sustainable implies like this level of production that I think we all know is not actually viable, healthy, or necessary. And so kind of figuring out for ourselves how to think about our work moving forward, not just as like a carbon, audit bottom line, but in terms of a more holistic view of like how we work. And staff wellness, I think, is really something that we're taking forward from working on this exhibition. So I really appreciate what you both offered around the idea of sustaining and reciprocity, and just everything that you've shared today. So thank you so much to both of you. I want to respect everybody's time. So even though there's many more things I'd like to ask, we're going to end it here. For locals or those planning a visit to Alaska, the exhibition will be up until September of 2024. So come see the work in person.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you both.